Great. So everything I'm going to be covering today is in week 10 day, which is Thursday. So yesterday's material. But so I wouldn't try to code along just because you might run into issues, and you might just kind of get lost initially. But if we go back to new site 6 and we had that login capability, we created that login page, a user would log in and they would get that response back with that long characters of like some sort of token or response back. Do y'all remember that? It's kind of a while ago. Yay, nay?
Sort of remember, yeah.
Sort of remember that. So we're going to be essentially doing that. So when we're doing new site 6 React, they had some other server generating that token and sending it, like pretty much like faking it. But here we're going to have our backend generate that token and sending that to the front end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to create a backend API that when a user logs in, it's going to send back a token, or if a user is already logged in, I'm going to send that token back to the backend to verify that that user is logged in and that is a actual authorized user. And then I'm going to allow that user to persist. So if you're ever on Facebook or into any social website or pretty much a lot of applications, if you log in into like Facebook and you close out your browser, you don't come back for a couple of days and you just go to facebook.com, your user is already logged in. You don't have to log in again. Is everyone kind of familiar with that, like user experience? So you don't have to log in every time you visit Facebook. Yes, no?
Yep.
Awesome. So they do that. So Facebook, a lot of applications allow that because they have something that tells the user when you visit that page that, hey, this user is logged in. And so let's keep this user logged in so they don't always have to come back and log in because that's not a good user experience. So there's a couple of ways users or applications can do that. They can do that using session storage or JSON, using a JSON web token. And we'll cover kind of both of those here shortly. So first, I'm going to create a Django backend. So I'm going to list everything out. All right, so I'm going to make a directory called Django React JWT. I'm going to cd into Django React JWT. And I'm going to open this up into a new VS Code window. All right. Cool. All right. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to create a couple of I need to first create a virtual environment, Python make venv. Can y'all see this? Should I zoom in a little bit more? There we go. All right, so I created a virtual environment. I'm going to source into that virtual environment. Great. So in here, we're going to install several libraries. So I'm going to Python or pip install. So recently, Django got updated on, I think on Tuesday, Django got updated to Django 4.0. And in order for us to utilize some of the libraries or packages for this, to make this work, we're going to have to use the older version of Django that you pretty much have been using all cohort or all throughout the entire program. So we're not going to use Django 4.0 because some of the packages aren't compatible with Django 4.0 yet. So I'm going to pip install Django, but I'm going to use Django 3.2.9, which is the version before Tuesday. So I'm going to pip install Django 3.2.9. I'm also going to install Scicab G2 just to keep things because we've always kind of been using a Postgres database. So pip install Cyclob G2. I'm also going to install Django REST framework. I'm also going to install Django REST framework dash JWT, which gives us additional methods and classes to generate a token. I'm also going to install Django cores headers that will allow us to make requests using the same domain. All right, so a couple of those are already satisfied. All right.
Tom, you probably said this, but I just want to make sure I was hearing you clearly. Django just got updated to 4.0 or for something else, and what you're about to walk us through won't necessarily run with the new version. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So some of the libraries or some of the packages that we're installing are only compatible with the older version of Django because those packages haven't been updated yet. Because Django
gotcha. So it's a matter of time for them to like bring it up and then probably, okay, gotcha.
Yep. And to be most of the time when you're going to be working at like a company, you're going to be using not the most up-to-date version of Django, version of Flask, version of Ruby on Rails, version of React. You might be using an older version. That's why we have virtual environments. That's why we have that package.json file. So you can install the appropriate versions for your application. All right. So I installed, what just happened? I installed my packages. Next, I'm going to actually go ahead and create a Django project. I'm going to call it Django admin start project. And this is going to be the backend of our application. So I'm just going to call it backend to keep things simple. All right, so I've got backend, and notice how I didn't put that period next to it because I'm going to have my front end React application in this directory as well. All right, so I've got my manage.py file. So I'm going to go ahead and CD into my backend project because I want to be on the same level as my manage.py file. So if I open up my settings file, I'm going to have to add a couple of things to my installed apps. I'm going to have to install or add the REST framework to it, as well as the cores headers as well. There's going to be a couple more things I'm going to add to this as well. So I'm going to add to my middleware, I'm going to add that cores headers middleware, cores middleware. So this cores middleware needs to come before this common middleware because we don't want to interrupt any HTTP requests coming from various domains. So that's what the cores middleware, we can even put that at the very top just to make sure it's going to hit this cores middleware first. So this always will come, always will come before this common middleware. All right. Next, we're still in our settings. I'm going to copy some code. Anywhere within here, I'm going to add some environmental or some variables to this REST framework. I'm going to add this variable REST framework, which has some attributes in here. We're going to use the default permissions classes. So this default permissions essentially says, hey, what permissions do you want to use anytime a user comes and makes a request to your Django project. So for this one, we're going to be using the REST framework permissions, and we're going to make sure every user is authenticated before they're able to make any requests to our application. So we're going to make sure because before anybody can come and make a get request, post request, update, delete, anybody would be allowed to do that to our applications up on Heroku or on our local host. But this says, hey, we want to make sure that the user is authenticated first. So they are in fact a authenticated user. They're already logged in, etc. So that's what this means. We also have this default authentication class, which says, what type of authentication do you want to use to authenticate users? So, and it goes in, I believe, descending order, which we're going to be using first, the JSON or JavaScript web token authentication. And that's what we're going to be using today. There's also that authentication, or sorry, session authentication, which we'll also kind of briefly talk about. And then this basic authentication, which I don't actually know what that uses for the REST framework. Any questions on just what this kind of does? Lastly, since we're going to be using our local host and we want our local host or React front end to be able to communicate with our Django backend, we're going to add that CORS origin whitelist. And we're going to add our localhost 3000, which is going to be our React app, to that whitelist. So this will allow our React to make requests to our Django backend.
Is there a reason why it's the same URL twice?
One's HTTPS and one's HTTP. I just added both of them just to keep, just to cover both bases. All right. So next, in our URLs in our Django project, again, we haven't created a Django app yet. This is all just confined within our Django project. So in our Django project's URLs, we're going to say from the REST framework JWT library. So the JWT library has some already built-in views for us to use, and they have a built-in view method import called obtain JWT token. And this view method will literally just generate a JWT token for our application. And we'll cover what that actually does. So when we go to a path, we can call this path whatever we want, but we're going to call it token auth. So like token authentication. And we're going to execute the obtain JWT token method. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and migrate. So Python manage.py migrate, because we're going to be using the built-in user model for this. We're not going to generate our own user model. We're just going to use the built-in user model. After this, I'm going to go ahead and create a super user. So I'm going to run Python manage.py create super user. And I'm just going to go through the prompt to create a super user. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yes, that's okay. Good. So I'm going to clear the terminal. So just quick recap what I did. I installed several packages. I installed Django, the older version of Django, so Django 3.2.9. I installed Scicop G2 to use a Postgres database, which I'm actually not using right now. So I can go ahead and if I want to use a Postgres database, let's go ahead and do that. Postgres QL and JWT. I'm just going to call it JWT. All right. And I'm probably going to have to, if I'm going to be using this Postgres database, create DB, JWT, I might have to remigrate. Cool. I already have one. Then let's actually call it JWT2. So create DB, JWT2. All right. Now I'm going to do Python manage.py migrate. So I'm going to use the Postgres database called JWT2. Even though I already migrated, I migrated using the SQLite, which is totally okay for this tutorial, but might as well use a Postgres database. So I installed Postgres database, created a Postgres database using Sitecop G2. Next, I installed the Django REST framework. I installed the Django REST framework JWT, which is going to utilize Django REST frameworks to generate JWT token. I also installed the Django CORS headers. And I added the REST framework to my installed app, the CORS headers to my installed app. I added this CORS middleware to my middleware in my settings.py file. I added our default permissions, as well as what authentication methods we're going to be using to authenticate users. And lastly, I just added my localhost 3000 to my CORS origin whitelist that will allow my React application to talk to my Django application. All right. And then in our URLs, I added this obtain JWT token, which is a built-in view method that comes from the Django REST framework's JWT package. All right. Next.
Tom, ask you a quick question.
Yep.
You mentioned that you're going to be using the built-in user model. And I remember using that before and thinking it was really cool. I'm trying to remember, and maybe you're going to do it already, but is there anything we need to do to like set that up, or it's just like as long as we've got the models, like, hey, we just get it for free kind of thing?
Yep. So you already have that built-in user model. So Django comes with a built-in user model already created for us. So you don't have to create a standalone user model if you don't want to. Now you can override that user model if you'd like, but you don't have to.
Thank you.
All right. So now I'm going to do Python manage.py run server just to let's see this work. So if I go to localhost 8000 /admin, I can log in, TA pre 1, 2, 3. Uh-oh. Why doesn't this? Oh, does anybody know what happened?
We changed our database.
Yeah, we changed our database. So I have to create a super user again. Python manage.py, create super user. Yep, tom@email.com. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Cool. So let's go ahead and run that server again. So, all right, TA pre 1, 2, 3. There we go. So this is the built-in user model. So TA pre, you can see all the password and all the stuff that's on it. First name, email address, has an is active. These are Boolean values, staff status, super user status, and it has all these user permissions that you can edit. So this is the built-in user model. All right, but we don't want to use the built-in user model, or it's not that we do want to use the built-in user model. But so before we went to the admin, but now let's go to the /token auth. So if I go to /token auth, click enter, we get this UI for the Django REST framework. And we went to the method obtain JSON web token. So we initially did a GET request. And it says like, hey, you can't do this. Detail method get not allowed. So you're not allowed to do GET requests to this method yet. But I'm going to log in using my super user. So TA pre 1, 2, 3. That's great. And I'm going to do a post request. And notice I get this big long string of random characters and numbers back. So this is what is called a JSON web token. So there are two ways to authenticate users. There are the not older way, but in the past, there was session tokens. So session tokens would be stored on the server. So you'd have either a model or a table in your database that has a bunch of sessions. So when a user logs in, it saves that session ID, which looks very similar to this. It's not exactly this, but it's a bunch of random letters and numbers. And you'd send that back to the user. The user would store that in the browser somewhere. So anytime a user would send a request back to the backend, they would send that session store. It would be like a session ID or a session token back to the server. Their server would then check in the database, typically against this, to see if that session ID matches any of the session ID in the database. If it does, it would check to see whether or not that user is logged in, whether it's been timed out. And if it's been timed out, it would prompt the user to log in again. Otherwise, it would just send that user back saying, hey, this user has permissions to log in, or I'm sorry, this user has permissions to do any of the requests that you allow that user. Also, it just says, hey, that this user is logged in. So session authentication, the token is stored in the backend on the server, either in the database or in memory. But with JSON web tokens, this here will be stored strictly in the browser. So you'll store it either in local storage or session storage. And this specific random string of characters and numbers actually means something. So we can decipher and pick apart this string, and it can reveal who the user is and also like what permissions this user has. So if you notice about this string, it's separated into 3 different sections denoted by this period. So there's the section 1, the section 2, and the section 3. So what this does, let me actually kind of show you what it actually, if we decrypt it, jwt.io. Where am I at? So right here. So you can kind of see it's split up into 3 sections. It's the headers, the payload, as well as some verifying signature. So if I paste what was in here into here, you can kind of see what it is. So this first part says what type of algorithm is being used to like essentially hash this web token. So it's the type, it's a JSON web token. It's using the HS256 hashing algorithm to hash this. The second is this payload, which when it's decrypted has my user information on it. So it has my user ID, my username, and my email, as well as it has an expiration time of when this token will expire. And this is in milliseconds. So that's what parts 2. And the last part 3, is the verifying signature, which goes through this hashing algorithm where it passes in this header into this base 64 URL encoder. Plus it passes in the payload into this base URL encoder, as well as some secret key that I don't know what it is. So this is some secret key, and this is the output of what that is. So if I were to change anything on this token, so essentially what it does, it takes these 2 values and outputs this value. So the 2 inputs here essentially outputs whatever this is. So if any value changes within here, so if I change this J to a lowercase j, now the value is invalid because these 2 together don't equal this anymore. So it kind of checks against one another to see if this token is valid. A little bit more than you need to know, but just know that's what the JSON web token is kind of used for. And there are other hashing algorithms other than this HS256. There's other hashing algorithms out there, but this has yet to be broken, so it's still good. any questions on the JSON web token?
Tom, this is somewhat related, I think, but I don't know, maybe a couple steps back. When we're creating apps, and we want to have like multiple users for our apps, like, I don't know, like I just think of any web app out there, and we're using Django, would we be then like, we'd be creating our users with like the model user? That's like just a good route to go to like log them in, as opposed to having like, you know, creating our own model for the user. We'd probably be overwriting them, I assume, because we'd give them like different privileges within the app, I'm assuming then. Is that, but it's like a very normal way to use it. This isn't just for like site admins or something like that, right? Like the user model.
No, so the user model, you can, so if you want to just use the built-in user model, that's totally okay. However, if you want to add additional fields to the user model or different attributes, you can override the user model, the built-in user model, or you can extend the built-in user model. So you don't have to use the built-in user model. You can create another user model that's just like class user, first name, last name, and whatever. So that's up to you as far as how you want, if you want to use the built-in user model or not. But the built-in user model has all this functionality already kind of built into it. So I'm just sticking with it right now.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. Somebody else have a question? Nope. All right. So that is what the JSON web token is used for. So when we use this, we're going to store this when we, since I like logged in here, I sent this to, this is what my response returns. And I'm going to store this once I create my React app. I'm going to store it in local storage or session storage. So anytime I send a request back to the user, such as like get wines or add a wine, I can add this token in the headers as authorization. So when that token, when the headers has that authorization in here, it's going to check against that to see if this user is authorized to do anything within the application. If this is wrong, it won't allow this user to do anything. Or if the session expired, because if you noticed here, it's got this expiration. So it's going to expire December 5th at 10:25. So it looks like this is already expired. You can see that by, well, we'll get into that. So this token has already expired. So I'd have to log back in. My user would have to log back in and get a new token for this for this user to actually do stuff. And the default expiration for this JSON web token is like 5 minutes, but you can update that. You can change that in the settings to make it, 20 days, 30 days, 6 months. So you don't have to keep logging your user every 5 minutes. All right. So we got our JSON web token back, but we don't necessarily always just want to, when a user logs in, we just don't always want to have the token be responding back. We might want to add some additional items to this response, such as maybe the username, the user ID, maybe some other attributes that we want to send back. Because typically when you sign in a user, you want to get that username to say like, hello, Tom, or something like that. All right. So with that, I'm going to clear the terminal. And now I'm going to actually build a Django app that allows users to log in, sign up, as well as to check to see if a user's already logged in by sending that token back to the user, or sending that token back to the server to check if that token is valid. And if it's valid, then the user is still logged in. So let's go ahead and create a new Django app. So I'm going to do Python manage.py. Is it start app? I'm going to call it core. I can call it API as well if I wanted to, but I'm just going to call it core. So I've got this Django app called core. So I need to register this Django app to my Django project. There we go. All right. So next, inside my Django app called core, I'm going to create, oh, not a directory. I'm going to create a serializers.py file. Is that how I spell it? Great. And I'm going to import a couple of things, a few things. So from REST framework, I'm going to import the serializers module, and also from REST framework that jwt.settings, I'm going to import API settings. And the last thing I'm going to import is the built-in user model. So from Django contrib auth models, import the user model. So in the serializer, I'm going to create two serializers. I'm going to create a serializer that when a user first signs up, I want it to respond. I want the serializer to serialize the user as well as the token and send that back to the front end. So that's when a user initially signs up. I also want to serialize an already existing user that's logged in. So I need to create two serializers. Any questions? Okay. So the first serializer I'm going to create is just the current user. I'll serialize a new user sign up. So I'm going to create a class user serializer with token. So I'm going to serialize a token as well. I'm going to do serializers. I'm going to use the model serializer because I'm going to use the base, the auth user model. And in here, I'm going to add two variables called token that uses the serializers dot serializer field. Where is it? Serialize or field method. And this just allows us to add an additional field to our user serializer when we send it back. So when we usually serialize a user, the fields that we send back is like the username, the email, maybe the ID, but there is no token field for that model serializer. So this token is where we're going to actually add that token field when we serialize a user. And we're going to add the password to serializers char field and make this a write only equals true, because we're going to have to pop the password off of that when we sign up a user. And I'm just going to copy some more code. All right. So this get token method is an already existing method within the model serializer, and we're overriding it. So we're grabbing the payload. We're grabbing this payload handler and this encoding handler, and we're passing our user, which is our already existing user, inside of this payload handler method, which has this payload. And this this JSON web token handler, we pass our user payload, which will have like our user password and all of that, and we're returning this token. So we're kind of overriding this built-in get token method. And in here, this is where we're actually creating a user and validating this user, as well as setting the password to the user. And in here, we respond with a token, this username and password. So this just responds with a signed up, a newly created user, and it's their token. The other class we're going to create is a lot easier because it just responds with a already existing user. And this is something that looks relatively familiar, where we just respond with the user model, the built-in user model, as well as what fields we want to include. So we'll want to include like the ID, username, and I don't know if there's anything else we want to include, like email or something like that. So this is an already existing user. When they, all right. So let's go into our views and get rid of all this. And we're going to import a lot of items, which we'll go through. Let's see. I don't think we need all of that. All right. So first thing we're going to import is the basic user model. From the REST framework, we're going to import permissions as well as any status attribute, or I'm sorry, module. We're going to import the REST framework decorators, and we're going to import the API view. This API view just allows us to, when we call a view method, that will only allow specific HTTP requests to go to that view method or to execute that view method. So in the past, when we would have like get wines, we would only be able to do a get request to those wines. If anybody tried to make a post request to those wines, it wouldn't allow us to. So that's what this decorator allows us to do. Again, we have this response class. We also have this API view class as well. This API view class is very similar just to like the base view class, but it allows us to do API requests from that. All right. So from the API view decorator, we're only going to allow this next method, current user. Yep, Michael.
Yeah, I just want to, I should know this, but I'm still at a point where I haven't quite implemented the Django REST framework. But when you say DRF, you're talking about like the imports that you're using right here on lines 2, 3, 4, and 5. Like that's a part of that Django REST framework, right? And that is handling all those basic CRUD methods that we were creating manually before, kind of, sort of like that's part of the gist, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Follow on question to this. The serializers, I'm a little bit like still fuzzy on. And what I'm trying to understand is like serializers, are they taking like the Python models that we create and they're turning them into like JSON stuff that we then send to React? Or is it like we serialize, or are we like JSONifying stuff that's coming from React and then using it in our models? I'm a little still fuzzy there. I apologize that these are real general.
Oh, good question. So in the past, if we were to query from our Postgres database, we would get like a query object. So we'd get some class or some class object. In the serializer, we convert that query or that class object into a basic Python object. Like, I'm sorry, a Python like dictionary. So before you'd get like an object that would look like, if you would do in the terminal, it would be like class, like user, object, something like that. Well, we think of it as turning this class object into like an actual Python dictionary with like an ID, username, or like ID of Tom, etc. So think of it as turning a class object into a dictionary or into a Python dictionary. That's what the serializers are for. And then we pass that serialized, that Python dictionary back to the view. And then we pass that Python dictionary into this response class, which turns it into JSON.
Okay, that helps. I appreciate that very much, Tom.
No problem. All right. So this API view only allows us to do GET requests at this current user view method. I don't think we actually need to have this there, but this is just for security reasons to do GET requests. We can also add like post requests here if we wanted to, but we only want to be able to run GET requests to this current user class. And this current user will get a current user if a user is already logged in. It'll determine whether or not this user is logged in or not. So this should be relatively familiar. So get current user, we just want to serialize running it through the user serializer. And we just want to grab the request.user from that. And then we just want to return the response. And we want to pass in that serializer data. I know in the past we did JSON response. That would actually, it's very, and we'd say like data equals serialize whatever, but this response class does that for us as well. And I'm pretty sure you need to use this response class to return a response if you're using the API view. All right. So this is to get a current user. So if a user is already logged in, I'm going to go to some API endpoint. We're going to pass in that token. We're going to check to see if that user is logged in, and it's going to return this user.
Tom, may I ask another question real quick? I apologize.
Yep. No, yeah.
Before we were using the serializer, like we were just manually making that JSON response. Is that kind of what we were doing in our views? Like we were just forming that JSON ourselves and then passing it to the response?
We were still using, so for when we were using that JSON response class, it's doing the same, think of it as doing the same thing as what this is doing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But we have to explicitly use the response, this response object when I believe, I could be mistaken if we're using this API view method. When we use this API view method or view class, it needs to respond using this response object.
I have another question. Are you going to go ahead afterwards and do also a post and maybe a delete
No.
method? Okay.
Well, I'll be doing a post method for not using the API view. I'll do a post method when we're creating a user. And that's what I'm going to do right now. Because right now we have this serializer when we're creating a user, but we're going to also do one using to do a post method, but we're not going to use this API view. We're going to inherit from this API view class.
Okay,
So
thanks.
create a new user. So I'm going to do class user list, and it's going to inherit from the API view method or class. So there are, before when we were just literally creating our own methods, def, user list or something like that. Those were creating just user or method, or I'm sorry, view methods. However, they have view, what did I just do? However, they have view classes that do all that for us. I think we kind of talked about it using the model view class. But the API view does pretty much the same thing. It just allows us to do HTTP. It gives us some additional functionality. Did somebody else have a question, Michael?
No, sorry, that was my hand from the
Okay.
previous question.
So for this create a new user, we're going to add this permission classes, and we're going to permissions allow any. This allow any, I'm going to actually make this an array. This allow any just means like, hey, I believe it means anybody's allowed to make requests to this user or to this user list. And this user list has already some built-in methods. It's got like create, post, get, or I think it's post, get, update. Remember how it has all those different built-in methods? But we're going to create a new user. So we're going to override this post method. So it takes in the request. It also takes in format equals none. I actually don't know what that does off the top of my head. I can't remember what this did in the past. All right. So here, when we create a new user, we're going to you run that user through that user serializer with token, and we're going to pass that data into the serial in this serializer. So we're going to pass the request data. And we're going to say, hey, if that serializer is valid, so if all that data is valid, we can save that user. And then we can return that response with the serializer data. We can add a status code if we want. We can literally just say status 200, or we can use our built-in status codes HTTP created. And if a user isn't valid, we can respond with errors with a status code of HTTP 400. What is it? 400 bad request. So these are the only two view methods or view view methods, view classes in order to get a current user and create a user.
When you talk about get a current user and create a new user, because the tokens expire, so if you are a current user and your token expires, do you become a new user again to get a new token?
That's a good question. So if your token expires, it's going to say, hey, no, you need to log back in essentially. So you don't have to create a new user. You just have to log back in.
Okay. And then somehow that will create the new token and we don't have to write it here. That's automatic with the framework.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that will automatically, it'll generate a new token for you with a new expiration time and all of that. All right. So now we created our views, our serializers. Now let's actually go ahead and create our URLs to actually create a user and get a current user. So I can say, from Django URLs, import path, and then from views, import current user, as well as the user list. And the reason why it's called user list instead of just like individual user is because generally when we deal with view classes, user list would have a bunch of methods to like get list, so which lists a bunch of users, post to create a user, get to get an individual user. So that's why it's just called user list. And then here we can do the URL patterns. equals path. I'm going to go to current user. So what that will grab the current user. That will run that current user method. And we can just run the users, go to /users, does a post request, and we'll use the user list as a view method. This says, hey, this class, run it as a view. And last, we need to actually forward this into include. So in our URLs in our Django project, we need to forward that to core/current user, users, and we want to include core/URLs. All right. The last thing I need to do, if I refresh that, oh, let's actually run that. Thon manage.py, run server. Form submission. So there's my token. I want to add, my username and some ID and stuff to this. So I can add a utility function. So in my Django project, on the same level of settings, I can create a utils file, which is almost like a helper methods. I can create helper methods or helper functions file. And I'm going to create a helper function. So I'm going to do from core serializers, import the user serializer. I'm going to create a method called def my JWT response handler, which takes in the user token, a user that initially is none, and a request equals none. And I'm going to return, and whatever I want this response to be, I want to add right here. So, I'm going to copy that. So I want to respond with a token, but in place of this hard-coded token, I'm going to pass in the token as well as the user. And this user, I'm going to pass in to the user serializer, where I'm going to do user context equals, this needs to be passed in request, and then I'm just doing the .data. I'm getting that response back, and I'm doing .data to actually get that response. So this is when I refresh this, or when I'm done doing this, it's going to respond with the token as well as the user with some user data that is responded from this user serializer. So it should respond from or with an ID, a username, and an email. And the last thing I need to do to actually invoke this utils, this my JWT response handler, I need to go in my settings file, and there's a variable called JWT auth, and it's got a variable on there. It says that's JWT response payload handler. And what method do you actually want to call to execute to actually respond with this? So I can override this JWT response handler, and what I want to use is this utils method. Where'd it go? Right here. So I want to use this JWT, my JWT response handler. So I need to do backend utils my JWT response handler. So this is the path to that.
So Tom, what you're saying is like normally it's just going to pass that token. That's it. But we want to pass more than the token. We want to like essentially like override it or whatever, add some more information that's going to be useful for the front end in like displaying some information. And so that's why we're doing this in the settings like, hey, no, we actually want to use this one. Is that
Exactly. 100%. So if I did everything correctly, and I just go to localhost 8000, I just get that. Now, if I go to localhost 8000 token auth, I get this get method not allowed. If I log in, if I did everything correctly, I get token with my user and my ID and email and my username. And let's see if I can do this. If I wanted to get a current user, I need to do a get request. So if I come over here, I'm opening up Postman. See if I can get this to work. And if I go to, if I normally go to like core slash, what is it, current user? Is that what that URL endpoint is? URLs. So current, it should be like, let's do current user. If I go to current user, I get authentication credentials were not provided. That means in my headers, I need to add some header and pass that token in. So if I refresh this, if I resubmit it, all right, so I'm going to copy this token. I'm going to go into Postman, dismiss. Let's go into headers. Do I have authorization? So authorization. I think it's bearer. I'm not quite sure if this is going to work. We'll find out. I'm going to current user. Is it core slash current user? Like so. Hopefully this works. If it doesn't work, we'll figure it out. How do I edit this?
it's down in the post? I do that every single time. It's right to the right of post is where you edit the URL.
To the right of post.
Yeah, to the right. Yeah, just to the right where you just put, there you go, right there. You just mouse in
Oh,
there.
I'm an idiot. Yep.
I know you're not. Like I've done that 1,000 times in Postman because I look at that name and I'm trying to like rewrite
Edit
it.
it. Yeah. So authorization. Let's look at the headers. I've got the authorization. I've got this bearer token. I'm going to do a get request because I want to do a get request. If you look at the code, I do a get request to that current user. Everything worked right. Hopefully, if it works, let's do send. Uh-oh, authentication credentials were not provided. Let's see what I did. Core should have been provided.
Hey, Tom, I used to remember it. Yeah, I think that needed to be JWT.
Okay.
I think bearer might be another use case.
Yeah, I've seen it both ways. JWT, JavaScript or JSON web token. Let's see if this works. There we go. Yep. Thank you, Ankur. So yeah, this needs to be JWT, not bearer. So in my headers, when I do authorization, I need to add the JWT before I pass in that token. And when I did a get request to that current user, I get my response back, which is just the ID, the username, and password. All right. All right. So now, if I create a React front end and I log in a user, I can take this token and store it in like local storage or session storage or cookies or whatever. And so when a user logs in, if I ever refresh my React application, I can check in local storage to see if there's a token there. I can grab that token. I can do an API. So I can, in my use effect, I can say like fetch logged in user. I can do a GET request to this current user API endpoint. And in the headers, I can add this authorization variable or this authorization key and pass in my JWT and actually pass in that token. And I should get a logged in user back. So I would never have to, if I do a hard refresh, I don't know if you remember, if you do a hard refresh, you will get like, you'd have to like log in again. This way, I won't have to do that every single time. All right. Clear. All right. It is 11:02. Let's go ahead and take a 7-minute break. And we're 8-minute break. Be back at 11:10. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, well, everyone was on break. So we'll just recap. We're able to receive a JSON web token from our Django backend, as well as sign up a user and get that JSON web token back, as well as check to see if a current user is logged in by sending that JSON web token back in the headers using the authentication key. What I did, so what we're going to do is connect the front end React app to the backend Django app. So what I did was create npx create React app and created a front end React app, as well as installed the React Router DOM library. So there's only things I installed. I currently have in the terminal down here in the console, I have my Django backend running as well as my React front end running. So my Django backend is running right here and my React front end is running right there. So this React app is going to be really simple. It's going to have a home page, a login page, and a sign up page, and that is it. But I'm going to create some API endpoints to, sign up a user. I'm going to create an API endpoint to get a logged in user. So to check to see if a user is already currently logged in, as well as to create a user. So any questions about that? All right. So I'm going to create a couple of directories first. I'm going to create a pages directory, which is going to contain my home page, login page, and sign up page. I'm going to create, let's just go ahead and actually create those. So I'm going to create a login page.js, why does it do that? A home page.js. Why does it do that? It keeps doing that. All right. And a sign up page. Oh my gosh. Sign up page. I'll just do sign up page.js. All right. So I created the pages directory. I'm going to create another directory called API so I can create my APIs. And inside of that directory, I'm going to create a user API.js file as well. The last directory I'm going to create a context directory, which is just going to have a user context.js. So this is just going to have the user. All right. So what do we got? So we have the login page, sign up page, a home page. So let's go ahead and create the home page. But before I do that, let's go ahead and inside of our app.js, let's get rid of all this stuff. So we'll get rid of the logo. So inside the app.js, I'm going to import some items. So I'm going to import from React. Oh, why did it do that? React. I'm going to import the use state, not user state. Use state, the use effect from React. I'm going to import the routes from React Router DOM, like so. I'm going to import the home page, login page, and sign up page. So I'm just going to copy that. So the home page, the sign up page, and login page. I'm going to also import the user context that I haven't created yet. So I'm just going to import all these that I haven't created yet. All right. So let's go ahead and create the home page. So in that home page, it's going to be really simple. I'm going to import the use context. I'm going to import the link from the React Router DOM. Link from React Router DOM, the user context. So this home page takes in is logged in and handle log out as a property. It also is going to grab the user from the user context, which we haven't created yet. And it's going to say homepage. And if there's a user, it's going to say hi username. If the user is not logged in, it's going to give us links to the login page or the sign up page. But if the user is logged in, it's just going to have a button to log out. Any questions on how the homepage is going to look?
Tom, up at the top, so we're just the use context. Maybe the use context. Maybe I'm not too clear on that. Is that another one of those React functions we've been using where it's like either like the use effect or the okay, for some reason I'm having a brain wipe on that use context. I don't know if you could just do like a quick refresher on it, maybe. I don't know.
So the context extracts state from the component and it stores the state in its own place. So it's like a separate file, and we're able to plug that state or that context anywhere within our application. So like for example, the home page, instead of passing user down as a property, we can just pass in user from the user context using the use context hook. So we're essentially we're extracting state from.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. Now my brain's back. Now I'm remembering how to use that. Thank you. And thank you, G.
Great. And so for the login page, I'm going to just copy some code. It's just going to be a simple thing that has whether or not if a user is logged in, it's going to have a log out button that returns the user back to the home page. It also will have a form that will allow a user to actually log in. And we have this handle login function as well that we're going to be passing in as a property. Last, the sign up page. We're going to have a sign up user API, which we haven't created yet. So this is going to sign up a user. We're going to have a handle sign up function that takes in the username and password. And we're going to await the user. We're going to pass that user object into the sign up user API, and it's going to respond. And if there's an error, it's going to just console log. Otherwise, it's going to navigate to the login page. And in here is that form to the handle sign up user page. Let me just go ahead and import all this as well. Let's just get this up and running so we can all kind of see what's going on. So we got that. Oh. So this is the app JS. This is where the heart of our application is. This has the routes to the login homepage, login page, sign up page. We're passing in some properties to the login page. And I'll show you. We got our APIs. And we have our user context initially. Set error is assigned, but let's just see what's going on here. I'm going to clear that. Just do a hard refresh. Do I get any errors? Okay. So here's the home page. It doesn't go anywhere. And it's got a login page and a sign up page. So what's happening when a user initially goes to renders the app.js component, which is the very top level of our application? Notice how we have a user. The initial value is null. And inside the use effect, what it's doing is saying, hey, if local storage.get item, if it has an auth user key, if it's not null, grab that item from local storage. So right now, local storage is null. So if there's something in local storage with auth user, run that. That means that there's a user that should be logged in. So it's saying get logged in user, get that token from local storage, send that token to the get logged in user API right here. So get logged in user. We pass in that token. We go to that current user API endpoint. So get current user, where we pass in that authorization, that JWT token, and then we respond with that. So let's just see if this actually works. So if I go to login, if I say TA preet 123, I'm logged in now. And before I see local storage, now I have that auth user, and that's my user token, or that's that JWT token. Now, if I go to home, it says hi TA preet. So this is the home page. Now, if I do a hard refresh, what it's going to do, it's going to check to see if this auth user is in local storage. If it does exist, which it does exist, it's going to take this JWT token right here, get user. So auth user is not null. It grabs that token from local storage, passes into that get logged in user, passes that token in here, and then responds with that user. So I can do a hard refresh right now. So reload. And notice how initially my user was null. And now I can go into that network tab to kind of see what's going on here. Can I just do, so get current user. So that's what I'm doing, the get current user. It's a get request, status code is 200, response headers, and here's that request headers. Where's the response headers? Do I have the request headers? So authorization, that's what I'm passing in with that token. That's what I'm doing right here. And now I get a preview of the response of that my user. So I get that user back. I can log out. So I can also sign up a user, Tom. So now and in the login page, Tom, typing in a password. Submit. And I can go to home and I can see hi, Tom. And you can kind of see that is what's responded back when I log in or create that user.
And Tom, that sign up just created a new user named Tom in the back end. Is that correct?
Yep. So that sign up user, I go to the HTTP localhost, that core/users. I do a post request. I pass in that user object. So username and password. I JSON stringify it. And if I go to the back end, you kind of see where it goes. Back end URLs, it goes to that /core/users to that user list. to that user list, and it does a post request and saves that user.
Awesome. Thank you. Is the password part of the JSON response from the front end? Like when you do that JSON stringify, is the password just like, or did we do, I'm trying to remember, do we do something to that password where it gets like encrypted, or we just send that like plain text in the stringify?
We stringify it, and then so you can actually look if I signed up in here, like core users, you can see what that payload looks like. But I don't want to show you it because it's an actual password that I use sometimes. And this is being recorded, so everyone knows my password now. No, joking.
What's your last four, Tom?
I don't know. I don't remember. But yeah. So that's how we can handle a sign up. So should be relatively familiar with just signing up, doing the forms. With the home page, this is just some logic to see if the user exists. That's why you initially see. So if I do that hard refresh, you see that like initial login, log out, or the sign up page. You initially see login, sign up. So if I do TA pre 1, 2, 3, and I do submit, you can submit that token auth. So current user, where'd that sign up go? Yeah, so that's what that is. And now if I go to my homepage, see the high TA pre, because the user is already stored in context. And now if I refresh that, see log in, log out, or log in, home, sign up, and it runs through that, get the current user. It does that get current user by, because this is the app.js, it's running inside that use effect, like get current user, checks to see if there's a token. If the token's in there in local storage, it sends that token to the backend. That backend responds with a user. Now I kind of rush through that front end part, but that's how we can link up the get logged in user. This is the main thing, to get a current logged in user, which you always want to run at near the top of your application within like the parent component, because you always want to check, hey, is the current user logged in? If it is, great, then send that user, send all that user's information back to the application. Does anybody have any questions?
So that top part, Tom, that top part is just going to be plug and play, right? You're just going to copy paste that. It's going to look literally identical to that when we create ours.
This part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now you can customize it. You don't have to use like auth user as your key for your local storage. You can just call it like token or something.
Okay, cool.
Yep. All right.
Will you be pushing this up?
Yeah, I'll push this up. All right. So I'm going to